Hello, my name's Andy. Welcome to episode 13 of Keeping Water. In this episode I'm going to be continuing winter prep on the pond. This time cleaning the pump, clearing detritus from the bottom of the pond, well, at least as much as I can do without a vacuum, and tinkering with pipework. After that there'll be the weekly update, where I make a new GoPro stand, give an update on the mirror carp's injury, and look at another potentially poorly fish. After getting in the pond the day before to cut the plants, the water had cleared up quite well, but there is, as I hope you can see, quite a lot of plant matter, algae and detritus on the bottom of the pond. The fish are much more visible since I cut the plants back, which is good for observing them, but not so good for them as they like a hiding spot. The tench happily feed and hide in the detritus in the bottom of the pond, and generally appear less bothered than the carp that the plants have had a trim. However, the muck on the bottom has to go, as decaying matter is obviously not good for the water quality. I really hope to manage this better in 2021, especially if I manage to get a pond vacuum. The pond is relatively large and my skimmer net is tiny and slightly broken, so I need something else to collect all that muck. I decided to use my old landing net, but to ensure I collected the finer bits, I added some fine mesh netting, although not very well, as we'll see later. So, as I did with the plant cutting in last week's episode, I put on the waders and got in the pond. I also brought the tub with me again to float around and make putting the collected muck in it easier. However, it wasn't, so I changed things later. While the water remained clear, I started by picking out the patches of sticks, leaves and general detritus I could see by attempting to scoop it up. This would also change soon. As I did this scooping up, more detritus ended up being dislodged and then began circulating in the water. So after each scoop I needed to catch as much of the now suspended detritus as I could, and then also deposit that into the tub. I continued working on all the patches of muck that I could see, although the water was beginning to cloud up and make this difficult. I then continued this scooping and catching on the areas I knew had the most deposits, especially the middle of the pond where the depth changes, the deeper parts and along the walled area. There were a couple of problems, however. Firstly, the net handle is quite long, and with the tub in the pond I was catching the end of the handle on the fence around the pond. Also, I made the finer mesh inside the net too long, so it sagged and made emptying out the detritus quite difficult and ineffective. With the water becoming cloudier, it was a case of feeling around with the net and scooping up what I found. I then turned my attention to the front and right side of the pond, where some of the cut plants, detritus that missed the skimmer and some dead algae had collected. I repeated the scoop and then catch process here too. Eventually, I finally worked out that having the tub on the side of the pond made life a lot easier. With the pond now completely clouded up, I began to work on the deepest area, scooping from the drop-off to the back wall, being careful not to catch the pipework and pump cable, repeating the scoop and catch as before for about 10 to 15 minutes. I next used the small skimmer net to remove as much muck as possible from any crevices around the pump and between the pipework. I also used the larger net to catch the stirred up detritus this produced. Finally, I used the small skimmer net along the drop-off between different depths to collect the remnants of muck that collected there. And after another 5 to 10 minutes of that, it was time to get out, but the netting wasn't completely finished. I then made a few more sweeps from the side of the pond to catch as much of the floating muck as possible. I like to learn something when I make these videos about the various ways I keep water. And from all this work I've learned that it is very labour intensive and an inefficient way of managing waste. I'm going to have to make a lot of similar efforts over the next couple of months when the leaves begin to fall, but my ongoing maintenance during the rest of the year needs to be better. Firstly, I really do need a vacuum, as this will prevent a lot of this work and keep the bottom of the pond much cleaner and clearer. Secondly, I need to spend more time cleaning the bottom of the pond, whether by net or vacuum. I've been a bit lazy in this regard over the last few months. The The following day it was time to get back in the pond again, this time to take out the pump for cleaning and to cover some of the joins in the pipework to protect the fish. As I hadn't dropped the water level, nor did I have my wetsuit on, I needed a tool to grab the pump and pipework, but even with that it took me a while to get them. With the pump out, it was time to clean it. I started by removing muck from the outside of the case. This had only recently become this covered due to my recent work in the pond. I then took it apart and cleaned the inside of each half of the case, using a brush and water from the pond. It took a while. After that, I cleaned the outside of the pump itself. In spring I may take it apart to check all is well with the innards. I've not had any concerns about it, but best not to be complacent. The pump has worked well for 5.5 years, and aside from not being a variable pump, it's done its job through thick and thin. Before replacing the pump in the pond, I wanted to cover one of the joins in the pipework. I used the grabber again to lift the pipe up. I used an old offcut of liner to wrap around the joint to cover the clips. I then used cable ties cut short and with the join underneath the pipe to hold the liner in place. I could next put the pump back together and reconnect it to the pipework. And then I could let the pump sink slowly back into the pond, and with that, this stage of pre-winter prep was complete. On to this episode's weekly update. You might be able to see at the bottom of the pond, if I get the angle right, the GoPro on a new base. I've been meaning to replace the old one for a while, as it was too prone to being off level and even wobbling in any kind of flow. Shockingly, in spite of how it looks, it was bodged together from a variety of leftover items. In between cutting the plants back last week and cleaning the pond this week, I did manage to get a bit of underwater filming done. I wanted to check a couple of things. Firstly, how they were behaving with a lot of their plant cover removed, and secondly, how the mirror carp's injury was progressing. The fish appeared to be their usual selves, maybe spending more time near the point in the pond where the depth changes, which is directly below the remaining overhanging plants, which would make some sense. As for the mirror carp, not a lot of change, although, and this is hopefully not wishful thinking on my part, the white mark appears less pronounced around the outside, which may be a sign of it healing. I'm obviously going to keep a close eye on it over the next few weeks. More worrying, however, were some marks around the mouth of the male tench. A number of fish had some marks on them after netting, but these marks seemed much worse. In addition, his tail appeared ragged, so I was obviously concerned about mouth and fin rot. Although the tench was behaving normally, feeding and as active as the other tench, I was obviously keen to address this as quickly as possible, so bought some Blagdon Fish Aid anti-fungus and bacteria treatment. I chose this one as it is safe to use with fish that can be sensitive to other treatment, like the rudd and tench I have in my pond. It's a once a day, 5-day treatment, and by the time this video comes out I'll have 2 days left. I'll update how things are going in the next episode. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Keeping Water, I really do appreciate it. If you've any feedback or questions for me, please leave them in the comment section below and like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this video. In next week's episode I'll be taking a closer look at mouth and fin rot and share some information about them and their treatment. There will also be the usual weekly update. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.